For more than 60 years, Mick Jagger has lived under a microscope. Every move analyzed. Every relationship dissected. Every interview picked apart for hidden meaning. But despite decades in the spotlight, there has always been a strange distance between the public version of Mick Jagger and the real person underneath it all. He mastered the art of revealing just enough while never fully opening the door. And maybe that is why the things he has started admitting in recent years feel so significant. Because when you put the pieces together, the picture that emerges is far more complicated than the legend people thought they knew. If you really want to understand Mick Jagger, you cannot start with the fame or the stage performances or even the music itself. You have to start with Keith Richards. Because their relationship shaped almost everything. It built the Rolling Stones. It fueled some of the greatest songs in rock history. And at times, it nearly destroyed both of them. They first met as children, then reconnected years later on a train platform in Dartford in 1961. Richards noticed Jagger carrying rare American rhythm and blues records, music that was incredibly hard to find in England at the time. That shared obsession changed both of their lives. Soon they were playing music together, living together, writing together, and slowly becoming something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. But behind the mythology of the Glimmer Twins partnership was something far more difficult. In recent years, Jagger has admitted more openly than ever that his relationship with Richards has often been exhausting and deeply complicated. Not because of simple creative disagreements, but because Richards spent much of the 1970s trapped in severe addiction. Jagger has described what it was like trying to work beside someone spiraling through substance abuse while still carrying the pressure of keeping one of the biggest bands in the world functioning. And what makes his comments so revealing is what he admits he never knew. Even after decades together, Jagger says they rarely talked directly about what Richards was actually feeling during those years. Think about that for a second. Two men tied together professionally and personally for over 60 years, yet still separated by a certain emotional distance. That detail says almost everything about who Mick Jagger really is. Observant, controlled, present, but always keeping part of himself protected behind glass. And that distance never fully disappeared. Over time, another tension grew between them. Keith Richards increasingly saw himself as the guardian of the Rolling Stones' soul, the person protecting the band from commercial compromise. Jagger became the strategist, the businessman, the organizer behind the tours, deals, branding, and survival of a global empire. Richards criticized him publicly for it, sometimes brutally. There were moments fans genuinely believed the band might collapse for good. But Jagger eventually admitted something important. He stopped expecting the disagreement to ever fully disappear. He accepted that he and Richards simply view the Rolling Stones differently. And maybe they always will. But that is where the story gets even darker. There is one event that changed Mick Jagger forever, whether he likes discussing it or not. Altamont. The concert at Altamont Speedway in December 1969 has become one of the most infamous moments in rock history. A free Rolling Stones concert in California. Poor planning. Minimal security. Hell's Angels members hired to help control the crowd. Violence almost immediately breaking out. And by the end of the night, 4 people were dead. One of them was 18-year-old Meredith Hunter, whose killing was captured on camera during the concert itself. For decades, Altamont became a symbol. Historians called it the death of the 1960s. The moment peace and idealism collapsed into violence and chaos. But Jagger has repeatedly pushed back against that interpretation. Not because he denies what happened, but because turning it into a cultural symbol removes the human reality of it. To Jagger, it was not about the end of an era. It was about the horrifying fact that someone died at an event his band organized. That stayed with him. And then, years later, he learned something even more disturbing. According to former FBI accounts that surfaced decades afterward, members of the Hells Angels were allegedly furious over Jagger publicly criticizing them after Altamont. So furious that they reportedly planned to attack him at his home in the Hamptons. The alleged plan involved reaching the property by boat to avoid security. But according to those reports, Bad weather forced them to turn back before they arrived. The most shocking part? Jagger says he never knew any of this at the time. Imagine discovering years later that people may have plotted to kill you, and nobody ever warned you. Not security. Not authorities. No one. Jagger later admitted that learning about the alleged plot changed the way he thought about fame, visibility, and the unseen consequences that come with speaking publicly. It forced him to realize that danger could exist around him without him even knowing it. And maybe that realization explains part of the emotional distance he always maintained. But long before the fame and chaos, there was a completely different Mick Jagger growing up in wartime England. He was born in Dartford, Kent, in 1943. His father was a physical education teacher. His mother worked as a hairdresser. By his own description, the family was ordinary.
No luxury. No celebrity connections.
Just a home where people entertained themselves because there were few distractions outside the house. Jagger says that was where his instinct to perform first appeared. Making people laugh. Holding attention. Controlling the energy in a room. Then came American rhythm and blues. As a teenager, Jagger became obsessed with the sound. The rawness. The freedom inside it. To him, the music represented something missing from post-war English life. It felt rebellious and alive. When he and Keith Richards bonded over those records, they were not just sharing musical taste. They were reaching toward another world entirely. But when the Rolling Stones finally arrived in America in 1964, the reality shocked him. Jagger has openly described parts of America at the time as deeply repressive. Segregation was still everywhere in large parts of the country. Racism operated openly. And the contradiction disturbed him deeply. The music he loved came from Black American artists whose own society often treated them brutally. That realization stayed with him for years. Jagger later admitted it changed how he understood the relationship between art and the conditions that create it. The fantasy of American freedom he imagined through the music suddenly collided with a much harsher reality. And instead of trying to simplify that contradiction, Jagger simply carried both truths at once. That became one of his defining traits throughout life, seeing contradictions clearly without pretending they could be neatly resolved. And nowhere is that clearer than in the music itself. People love imagining legendary songs appearing through moments of magical inspiration. But Jagger has always been surprisingly blunt about songwriting. He says most of it came from constant work, not mystical genius. Satisfaction, the song that turned the Rolling Stones into global superstars, reportedly came together in an ordinary moment beside a swimming pool in Florida while touring. No lightning bolt from heaven.
No dramatic artistic breakthrough.
Just years of non-stop writing and performing, finally producing something unforgettable. That honesty makes his comments about other songs even more fascinating. Take Brown Sugar, one of the band's most controversial tracks. Jagger has admitted he now views the song with genuine discomfort. He says even he cannot fully explain where some of its darker imagery came from. In recent years, the band quietly stopped performing it live altogether. That willingness to critically examine his own work matters. Jagger does not pretend the complexity is not there. He simply admits it exists. And then there is Exile on Main Street. Of all the Rolling Stones albums, Jagger has increasingly pointed to that chaotic early 70s period as the band's creative peak. Recorded largely in Keith Richards' villa in the south of France while the group dealt with legal troubles, financial stress, addiction, and complete disorder, the album somehow became a masterpiece. Even Jagger says he cannot fully explain how it happened. And maybe that uncertainty connects directly to the most painful relationship in the band's history, Brian Jones. Before there was Mick Jagger as the public face of the Stones, there was Brian Jones. He founded the band, named it, helped shape its early sound. But as fame exploded, Jones spiraled into worsening substance abuse and instability. By 1969, the group decided to remove him from the band he had created. For years, Jagger avoided speaking too openly about that period. But more recently, he finally admitted something painful. He said the band sometimes treated Jones cruelly. Jagger blamed part of it on immaturity and group dynamics. Young men reacting badly to someone vulnerable in their circle. He admitted Jones's instability made him an easier target inside the band. And that honesty matters because it strips away the mythology people usually place around rock legends. Brian Jones died in July 1969 at just 27 years old after being found at the bottom of his swimming pool. Officially, it was ruled a drowning involving drugs and alcohol. Conspiracy theories followed for decades, but Jagger never encouraged them. Instead, he described Jones as someone who had become deeply troubled and disconnected from both the band and himself. One memory still stayed with him. Jagger later said recording No Expectations during the Beggars Banquet sessions was the last time he truly felt Brian Jones fully connected to the music. That detail says everything. Jones's collapse was not sudden. It happened slowly, painfully, in front of the people closest to him. And once you understand Brian Jones, you begin understanding Keith Richards differently too, because the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. For much of his life, Mick Jagger has remained tied to brilliant but self-destructive people whose problems affected everyone around them. He carried those relationships while also carrying the responsibility of keeping the Rolling Stones alive. That required far more than physical stamina. It meant surviving crises that could have destroyed most bands many times over. Death, addiction, and now, after decades of carefully controlling the distance between his public image and his private reality, he finally seems more willing to let people see the complicated truth underneath. Which raises one final question. If Mick Jagger spent 60 years protecting certain parts of himself from public view, why is he finally opening that door now? And after surviving addiction, death, Altamont, public feuds, and everything that should have destroyed the Rolling Stones decades ago, what could possibly end them at this point?